Welcome and thank you for joining us. You are listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Just last year, Hollywood decided to slap us in the face with a magnificent blockbuster simply titled 2012. That's right, apparently the whole world's coming to an end, and only John Cusack can save him and humanity from being able to get onto the arks and start a whole new world. It seems everybody's caught up into the significance of what 2012 is going to bring to us because it signifies the end of a Mayan calendar. Well, let's go ahead and explore that a little further to realize that most of what the Mayans precipiced their calendar on was cycles, especially astronomy cycles. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is physicist and astronomer Robert McGowan, and we're going to be talking about the astronomical significance of 2012. Way to pull the woo-woo out of that one. And I'd like to welcome to our program today our guest, Robert McGowan. Robert, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Hi, Daniel.
Now, what is the astronomical significance of 2012?
Well, you know, it's kind of funny because there's always been throughout time, you know, when there was an end of physics, when Einstein said that with the quantum mechanics this was the end of physics, and Gödel, when he presented his incompleteness theorem, von Neumann said this was the end, meaning the end of the quest of mathematics. And so, you know, obviously, great epochs come to an end, and maybe we should just say it's the end of astrology. No, astrology was to astronomy as alchemy was to chemistry, and so it was the end of the Mayan calendar, and the Mayan calendar was based on a 5,000-year cycle, a little over 5,000 years, and the calendar started 3,114 BC, and that was like year one of the Christian calendar. Mm-hmm. And we don't know why the Mayans started the calendar at 3114 BC. You know, there must have been some significant event, or that was the time that the sacred tree crossed the ecliptic of the Milky Way.
Mm-hmm. Now, talk about the Mayan prophecy that perhaps some of our listeners may not have heard of before.
Well, you know, and one thing on prophecy nowadays is prophecy, the future hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. And so, obviously, when people talk about prophecy, it's kind of like they're talking about a self-fulfilling prophecy, that if they want something to happen, they work toward having it happen, and if they don't want it to happen, they'll do anything that they can to make it not happen. But the Mayan prophecy was just the beginning of a new age. But, you know, there's a lot of subtle things within the Mayan culture, just like the way that they built their architecture. One thing I was studying was in the year 1050, when Chichen Itza was built in the Yucatan, there was also a supernova, the Crab Nebula supernova between the stars of Elnath and Alclone that became as bright as the gibbous moon. And so the Mayan astronomers or astrologers, you know, could have equated something happening in the sky with some kind of event, like the birth of a king or something, a Mayan king. And so in 1054, this supernova may have had some kind of significance to the building of Chichen Itza, as well as, you know, as the Anasazi culture in the southwest. And if you go up to Kitt Peak, you can see the beautiful tile work in the Mayan calendar on the side of the visitor center. I encourage you, if you're ever up in Arizona, and go up to Kitt Peak, where the Native Americans made the Treaty of the Long Eyes with the Treaty of the Indians and the astronomers, so they could build their telescopes on Kitt Peak. Mm-hmm. But the tile mosaic depicts the Mayan calendar there. It's very well done. Mm-hmm.
Now, since it's a 5,000-year cycle and we're coming to an end, what does that mean, actually?
Well, it's when the Mayan sacred tree comes to the galactic plane. You know, there were a lot of things and speculations that there was a book called The Mayan Factor that there was a code that predicted that there would be contact with alien beings. There were all kinds of things, but basically it was kind of like a precession as the Mayan Great Sacred Tree came across the plane of the Milky Way, and it was just part of their cycle, their calendar. They actually had 3 calendars, which made it kind of confusing. It's amazing. You'd have to be an astronomer and an accountant just to calculate all the different cycles that they had.
Uh-huh. Now, how about Venus? I understand that has quite a role in all this.
Well, it's interesting. When the great physicist Richard Feynman went to Mexico and was working on deciphering the Mayan alphabet, it had been deciphered, the base 20 Mayan alphabet, and their mathematics was in base 20. Feynman saw that there was a 225, which when he saw that, he knew that they were talking about Venus. He was trying to understand how Venus related to the Mayans. And, there's, of course, they have a 260-day sacred calendar, which is longer than the Venus year of Venus, as well as the gestation period for a child. And so the sacred calendar may correlate with the gestation period of a child, as compared to Venus as it moved up and down in progression and retrograde. They saw that as probably like some kind of eye in the sky or godlike factor, as compared to there was no Polaris at no pole star when they looked up the constellations at night, so there was just kind of like a dark vortex in the sky that everything rotated around. But, the Venus obviously had some kind of significance. There's work going on to this day. Dr. William Saturno, who spoke at the Schnitzer here in Portland a while back, had discovered a lot of Mayan petroglyphic writings that were in Guatemala. They used the Hubble Space Telescope and satellite imagery not the Hubble Space Telescope, but satellite imagery to look at the forests in Guatemala and see if they could actually find some of these temples that were in the forest, and they found ancient temples that had never been discovered before.
Oh, interesting. Now, when it comes to the constellations, talk about the significance of that and the end of the Mayan calendar.
Let's see. The constellations, it would just, be the sacred tree. The Mayans had their constellations, and I was studying to see how their constellations overlapped each of the 20 symbols of their alphabet. That each group on the Earth had their own ethno-astronomy, and they so the Mayans had their creation myths with the sky, and with the sacred tree and the Mayan king underneath the sacred tree. They used the creation myth to explain things, and the Chautauquas that they passed down from generation to generation. Of course, Eudoxus, the Greek astronomer, had documented the 48 constellations of Eudoxus, of some of the great constellations, and then over time the astronomers, even in the modern times, refined the constellations and created the roadmaps of the modern constellations that we have today, the roadmaps of the sky that astronomers use.
Interesting stuff. Now, you have something about the Babylonian calendar in the relation to the Mayan calendar. Explain that.
Well, the calendars are pretty tricky. There's the Hab, the 20-month, 18-day calendar of the Mayans, And this calendar was probably first used in about 550 BCE, and there were 5 extra days that were tagged on to have 365 days, just like the Temple of Chichen Itza. They even, their architecture, they had 94 flights of 91 steps with the one step on the top, which came out to be 365 steps on their great step pyramid, where the Temple of the Feathered Serpent came down the temple at the summer solstice. And the Babylonian calendar originated with the Babylonians, of course, and it was a lunar calendar of lunar months, and then there were a few days tacked on to the end, 5 days or so tacked on to the end, or they didn't know about the 1/4 day extra, so obviously they'd have to have a leap year, otherwise the solstice would precess through time.
Now, you brought up ethnoastronomy. Talk about what that is and how it relates to the Mayans and the people of the world.
Ethnoastronomy is something like, it's just the creation myths. The Native Americans had their creation myths of the sky, and the Africans had the planting stars, and the Bushman and the lion and the Bushman's arrow. The Aborigines, they used the dark lanes of the Milky Way as the backbone of night to, their constellations were the dark lanes. And so each culture of the world had their own creation myths and their own relationship to the sky, and that they would pass down from generation to generation. It's just the Greek Eudoxus had collected these myths, these creation myths, and of the Babylonians and the Mesopotamians, and wrote them down. There were the 48 main constellations at the time at that of the northern hemisphere. You'd think that the Mayan constellations would have played a role into the kind of the layout of the original constellations when they were putting them together. Also, there's a lot of other constellations that, even though they're not the main constellations, they're azurisms, like the azurism of the teapot in Sagittarius, which is a modern constellation, but it helps you kind of look at Sagittarius and know where the location of the constellation is.
Now, how did, let's just talk about 2012. So I guess the bottom line is there going to be anything significant that's going to be happening in this year that people should be concerned about, or is it going to be business as usual?
Well, the Chinese are going to launch a spacecraft landing on the moon, if they can do it, a soft landing on the moon, which is pretty difficult to do. So, and probably, with the Mayan calendar ending in December 31st, 2012, one of the great events, of course, is the transit of Venus that's on June 6th, 2012, which is happens every 122 years and then 8 years apart. I went to Europe with a couple colleagues of mine, Dareth Murray and Morris Stewart, a professor from MIT, and we observed the transit of Venus in Lugano, Switzerland, on the border of Italy, on a fjord between two mountains as the sun rose. And then we hopped on it. The transit took 2.5 hours. We had a telescope from that was sent to us from France, a projection telescope, and then we had a small, like Questar telescope that we took with us. And after we observed for about the first half hour, first and second contact, we hopped on a fast train, went over to Zurich, and observed third and fourth contact in Zurich. And you could actually see the transit naked eye. It was quite spectacular. I'd seen the transit. It's like a transit of Mercury. I've seen transits of Mercury with H-alpha light, and you can actually see the the planet Mercury moving through the corona of the sun before it makes first and second contact on the disk of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite spectacular through a solar telescope.
Now, Robert, do you think that people become more interested in astronomy as 2012 approaches?
Well, I would hope so. With the movies of, that excite people with, of course, with aliens, and one of the great things is, who knows, maybe we could discover extraterrestrial life in 2012. That would be a great thing to see if there were any milestones in the SETI. But that would be a wonderful thing to happen in our lifetime, is to discover extraterrestrial life, get an intelligent radio signal. With the Venus transit, there will be a lot of excitement with the Venus transit. It was on every front page in Europe, and just about every magazine in Europe, when the Venus transit happened 8 years ago. And we couldn't see it except on a few places in Nova Scotia, third and fourth contact, but most of it was the clouds were up. So I'm probably going to head to the desert and observe the Venus transit with some friends with a little Venus transit expedition for 2012.
Well, it sounds to me like everything isn't going to go all to hell as the movies would portray.
No, it's just the end of an era.
Well, Robert McGowan, thank you for joining us here on the program. Is there a website people can find out more about this?
Well, yeah, there are a number of websites. There's so much information out there on 2012. I would recommend looking up the Mayan calendar and the Babylonian calendar and studying those, because then it will tell you more about 2012. And then also, of course, there's a question of whether or not the Mayans discovered precession, the precession of the equinoxes, the 26,000-year precession, and the dark vortex, you might call it, that that was above at the North Star. There was no North Star for the Mayans, and the Greek astronomer Hipparchus discovered the precession, as well as there might have been the Mayan astronomers might have discovered it too. They noticed that the star maps of Aristillus and Timocharis, Hipparchus, there's a satellite named after him, discovered a 2-degree kind of shift of the stars, and so the Mayan astronomers may have observed this precession too. And Hipparchus had a 170-year baseline, so obviously the Mayans had a long enough baseline to discover it. It's he used the star maps of some of his colleagues, but the North Star rotates. When the pyramids were built in Thurbin in Draco, was the North Star. So the pyramids orientated the Queen's Chamber and the pyramids 5,000 years ago toward the star Thurbin. And the Egyptian astronomers may have also, they had a long baseline of observations. They may have known that there was a drift or a wobble of the Earth that caused this precessional drift of the stars. But yeah, I would look up some of the Mayan calendar and precession of the equinoxes, and the Babylonian calendar, because now with the end of the Mayan calendar, there's a lot of information out there. I've seen some astrology websites that said the Earth, there was no astronomical event that was not going to happen, which is not true. The transit of Venus is once every 122 years in the 8-year cycle. Is a absolutely fantastic event you won't want to miss through a solar telescope. And if you can find, go to one of your local observatories June 6th, and you'll get a chance to see an event that at one time, just 8 years ago, nobody on the planet Earth had seen it before.
Oh, wow. Sounds like interesting times. Robert McGowan, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you, Daniel.
You bet.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You bet. We encourage you, the listener, also to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com and sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. Also be sure to visit our blog as well, where we archive our shows and have great information for you to use and share with others. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.